tell me more about your impression for the harp, and what are your thoughts on the harp as an instrument? I know that you feature the harp in your orchestration very often in your other major orchestral works.
Yes.
How do you feel the harp as an instrument?
I loved, I think it was Ravel or a conductor that said the harp provides the windows in the orchestra. And there's an element of that. It gives a sonority to the orchestra that if you take it away, it just is not there. I'm almost of a mind that it's good to amplify the harp because it, of course, can be drowned out very easily in an orchestral texture. So given that the amplification is done carefully, I feel that can work really well. One has to be careful with that aspect, but it's important to me that the harp carry its own with an orchestra, and that's not easy because the balance is difficult. You get the same thing with a solo instrument and orchestra, violin and orchestra, flute and orchestra, any solo instrument and orchestra. And many composers have reorchestrated their music because, especially with a harp, not being heard enough, well enough. So they reorchestrate and they be careful with the dynamics. And of course every hall is different.
Yes, and how you position the harp, it's very important too.
So where there are dynamics in the score, I think these have to be carefully considered.
You know what I tell composers these days? No louder than beautiful.
Oh, that's a great answer. That's a great direction. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. But to always consider the acoustics of wherever you're playing. Of course, the position of the instrument. I would generally think that the instrument should be as far forward on the stage as possible.
And with a riser.
A riser
does magic.
Well,
very
then,
strange.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I hope that gets out that, yes, use a riser. Because for me, it's the harp has to come through in the performance. If it doesn't, then it's self-defeating. I would be very disappointed to go to a performance where I couldn't hear the harp enough. So that's a consideration when I'm orchestrating.
Let's come back to your harp concerto. Let's talk about the second movement, the moving second movement.
Yes.
The opening theme of the second movement reminds me a lot of the Celtic for harp.
Yes. Yeah.
And throughout the movement, you feature these different moments. You have a magical flute and harp duet moment. You have a moment in which the harp is blend into the upper strings, and you have a moment with the cello and the harp duet, and so forth. And towards the end, when you have this flute and harp doubling, doing this beautiful melody, I see it as quite sad and quite tearful.
Yeah.
How do you see this movement yourself? And do you see it as a happy ending at the end, with the last 5 bars that you have this beautiful upward
sort of resolution.
Yeah.
One of my friends, when asked what kind of music does Michael write, he didn't know. And he said, well, his music will make you cry. And there is that element in my music that's very poignant. And people often tell me that it gets to their heart. And I'm very happy that that happens because I write what I feel. And what convinces me, which is an advice I give to young composers, write what convinces you. Don't worry about being current. If you want to use effects and so forth, fine, but for a musical purpose. If it's just effects for effects and not for a musical purpose, then I would have a suspicion that that those effects aren't serving the musical needs. So if the second movement ends in a resolution, then it's just fine with me.
It's optimistic to you.
Yeah.
So it is a happy ending. So we go to the third movement, which features a very catchy flamenco rhythm.
Yeah.
And in many sections, you actually require the harpist to literally strum the strings.
Yeah.
So were you thinking the harp almost like a guitar, or?
It had certainly along that line. And there's some musicians and composers that can think of the harp as a large guitar. There's that. The difference, of course, is that the harp is a much bigger instrument and can produce a more dynamic sound. Which movements of the concerto do you like best?
I always feel the first movement is very nice with your hallmark, your shifts of harmony, while the harp is doing this beautiful heavenly arpeggio, something so idiomatic for the harp to do this beautiful arpeggios up and down, and then while the harp is so busy plucking away, and you have this beautiful harmony below supporting lightly and constantly shifting the harmony. I always felt that movement is very, very cool, literally.
Okay.
And of course, for the audience, they love the third movement.
Yes.
The colorful nature of that movement.
Yeah, the Spanish dance,
with the cool rhythm. With the memorable rhythm.
Yeah.
And brilliant orchestration, percussion and the brass.
Yes. In fact, the premiere that Elizabeth Polka did, they couldn't get the brass players. They were on holiday.
Oh, okay.
And I really missed the brass in that. And then when I heard you play with the Vancouver Philharmonic, with the brass, and I was there with Elizabeth Polka, and we both were saying, wow, what a difference in the sense that the brass just really added a wonderful element to it. So,
in all those performances I had in Ontario, it's been very successful. The audience loved it.
What more can you
always, I think it was always the third movement that really
got people going.
Got the people got their feet up. And the critics was very, very, very positive.
Oh, good. Which is heartening for a composer. So I was thinking of, I don't know if you know the pianist John Browning, who took the Samuel Barber piano sonata, or the piano concerto, made it his own, and traveled the world playing this work. And I was thinking to myself, wouldn't it be wonderful if Andrew became the interpreter of this concerto?
I will try.
You're certainly doing everything you can.
Yeah, well, with the experience I have to perform this concerto, many times my interpretation also changed. And and also with maturity, after playing these pieces for so long,
I think that if you advertise that there's a Canadian composer in the program, that is positive or a negative?
That's a good question, Michael. That's a very good question. Are Canadians patriotic?
Well, they're patriotism be a factor,
Yeah.
or if they see that it's a Canadian composer, well, if it's contemporary, what does that mean to them? I've had many instances where people have thought that, oh dear, it's going to be a contemporary work, and then they hear this work, this concerto, and they totally turned around and changed their minds about Canadian contemporary music, because of course it's very accessible, and the experience you've had and I've had with it is the opposite of what happens with a lot of contemporary music. So hopefully this won't be a negative. The question is, how do you publicize a work which may be a negative?
Well, one good thing is this is a harp concerto, so people might be actually quite curious to hear the harp featured in a solo, which is not often.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay.
That actually might be some of the audience can hear, because the harp has always been associated with beauty.
Yes.
And something that is magical.
Okay.
So there might be one factor that the audience might become a little bit more open-minded. But I think in general, audience these days are a little more open-minded with new music. I think the younger audience is rather curious about new music. What's this about? So I'm really looking forward to seeing how the audience would react. And I'm sure it will be triumphant with my experience with the work in the past. And I know your harp concerto was written in 2002. What was your idea behind this composition when you wrote it, and after so many years, I know you have written well over 100 pieces, a number of pieces.
Up to 160.
Oh my goodness. So what does the harp concerto mean to you from your catalog?
Okay, well, it's a very personal reason. My wife Penny was passed on. The harp was her favorite instrument. She loved the harp, and I wanted to write something for her that I thought that she would enjoy. I wouldn't have presented anything avant-garde or effects-driven, that sort of thing. So I wanted to write something that was accessible and very idiomatic for the harp. So that was what was pushing me. Elizabeth Volpe lived not far from me, and I would go over to Elizabeth's house and consult with her about what
can be done.
What can be done. She gave me quite a lot of books, manuscripts, and so forth. And there were certain effects, like the guitar, like the strumming, which I thought were very effective and almost percussive.
Yes.
And added to the percussive elements.
And this movement also calls for a large percussion section in the orchestra.
Yeah.
Can you tell me more about your idea behind it? Because you did pick some interesting percussion instruments.
Well, it's a Spanish dance, for one thing. So I wanted, I think I have maracas in there.
Beltry.
Beltry.
That's the most important. That's very, very memorable to the audience.
So percussion, when I was studying with Lennox Barkley in England, and I asked him about percussion, and he said, well, my boys, you just sort of, after you finished, you sort of added like spices and things to the orchestra. And that's sort of an interesting approach, but I thought the percussion element is very important in that movement, because in the last movement, because it is a Spanish dance, and you want to have that very forceful rhythmic element, which certainly appeals to everyone. I've noticed in the performance, people tapping their feet, tapping along, and an interesting rhythm because it's combinations of 2 and 3, and the Sigiriya actually, when I first started doing it, I found it very difficult.
Yeah. When I first started, it was difficult too.
Yeah.
And for the orchestras, when they first rehearsal, it's a little bit of a little bit of challenge. They have to get used to it too.
Yes. I think once they get onto it, then it's fun.
Feel the groove.
Yeah, they feel the groove. Exactly right. One of the harpists here went to New York, and she took just the last movement to her concert, and said it was a phenomenal success there. It certainly gets the audience stirred up, and by the end, I think their enthusiasm is great.
What are your pieces of wisdom that you have, that you learned in your life as a composer? As we know, Michael, you are an icon in the Vancouver music scene. You've been here for so long. So
well, I'm writing my memoirs, and it's called The Decomposing Composer because I'm at the age and stage of decomposing. It's facetious, but it's kind of fun. It's a catchy thing to say that. My advice to any artist is to do what convinces you, whether it's writing or whether it's painting or sculpture. Music is the same. If you're convinced with doing 12-tone music, like Stravinsky was at the end of his life, fine. Don't worry about what critics say. You may disenchant your audience, as Stravinsky did. They were used to the Firebird, and then when the Rite of Spring came along, they were completely unnerved. There was a riot, of course, 1913. But then he went into a neoclassic period. He obviously believed in that, and his music reflected that. And then at the end, he was more into the 12-tone. I think it's more non-tonal than atonal. Atonality implies no tonal center at all, ever. And then there's the serial approach where everything is ordered, mathematically ordered. And I'm reminded when I was studying with a wonderful composer in Western Washington University, and I had done a piece which was quite intellectual. And he looked at me and he said, too much this, not enough this. And it's a trap you can fall into. You can be enamored of maybe even the mathematics of writing music, but that can be a trap. On the other hand, you can forego what convinces you because you're asked to do some sort of commercial music, which is not your cup of tea at all, but you do it because you're being paid for. I'm lucky in the sense that I find it very difficult to not write music which doesn't convince me. I got a terrific commission to do Latin dance music and to produce a Latin dance every day. I did over 110 of these things. And it was a challenge. I went to the music store and got a whole bunch of books on Latin dances and so forth. But if you heard these dances, I did with a drummer, obviously were convincing because they had a panel that listened to a lot of Latin music, dance music that was presented to them. And they told me later that they just had a panel of dancers and a choreographer who didn't look at all the publicity that was provided. They just listened, and they chose what I had done. So that I did what I felt was convincing, and I think that it convinced this panel, and I think that's the secret. Don't pander if you can get away with that. Take a day job that doesn't involve music, so you don't have to sacrifice your ethics. I would far rather be teaching young kids and not have to pander to commercial requirements. That's my advice to young composers.
Thank you, Michael. It's lovely seeing you in Vancouver today.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you for coming all this way, Andrew.